Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Matza, percussionist, drummer, and artistic director of KoSA Music, inviting you to listen in on conversations with friends, artists, professionals, and experts in our music world. I have the pleasure today of having with us Mark Guiliana, great drummer, composer, and great artist in general. And talking about shaping your journey, Mark, first of all, thank you for doing this. It's really nice to have you on board and talk a little bit.
Totally my pleasure. Thanks so much for the invite.
Yeah. And it's interesting when we talk about, just the theme of shaping your journey, and also, what's really important, what I find is, what's important is the who helped you along. Of course, you do all the work. It's the who, the what, and the why also. Why you do certain things, why you take certain decisions that will take you to a different place. And then people who help you, people who open doors, people who turn you on to other things. I mean, I think in that process, that's certainly been my experience. And I think all of us would probably say the same thing on one level or another. We don't do things by ourselves. Of course, we do the heavy loading, all the work, but the guidance and the opening doors, the turning people on to things, ideas, and that kind of thing always comes into play. What was your background? If you want to go back a little bit, just to bring us into your world a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, let's see. I'll try to condense it in a clear way. I started playing drums when I was 15, actually, and there were no examples of musicians in my family. My brothers were great athletes and really, really high level baseball players, and my parents were school teachers and always very supportive, but didn't have any personal experience with music nearby. And it was really, my parents always wanted me to be busy. That was the thing. Hey, as long as you got something going on, cool. So I was really into sports, and then I started to, as the level kind of went up and the competition, it became more about competition rather than just kind of fun. I started to check out because I don't really relate to that as much. And a cousin had a drum set and sat down one day. Oh, this is fun to make some noise, and oh, maybe I'll take drum lessons. That'll be the thing that I do instead of playing soccer. So very, very innocent. When you talk about the why, I wish I had this really romantic, deep reason. But it really just started in that very simple way. So, okay, who's the local drum teacher? That was Joe Bergamini. Again, I wish there was a more exciting why it was Joe, but he was the local drum teacher. And just that alone, talk about the people. I mean, the incredible luck that it's pure luck that we were 3 miles from each other, or however far it was. He was simply the local guy. So I went to him, and right away I felt really engaged. He's an incredible teacher. He's 10 years older than me, so he was only 25 at the time, but really had his stuff together, had a curriculum, had a focus, had a structure to everything. And I think back sometimes, because I didn't go in saying I'm going to be a drummer. I just said, I'll try some drum lessons. So I think, wow, what if that was a different teacher, and maybe a guy who wasn't as engaging or didn't inspire me, and maybe 3 months later I try something else. So I really am forever grateful to him, of course. And I said I was going to be concise, but this is setting up to be quite long. But of course, Joe really deserves to be honored. And so I was with him. That was pretty much high school. So I was with him all through high school. And I don't know why. I just wanted to do the work. It was quite formal. When I think back, we were you walk into his basement and he's got these beautiful kits all set up. And we were on the pad for about maybe 3 months, doing the free stroke and working on rudiments. And I'm just kind of staring at the kits on the other side of the room, like, when are we going? But at the same time, I just I practiced what he told me to practice, and I don't know why, but I wanted to work on those glam accents, and I wanted to do the rolls and those things. It just felt good, and some of it just kind of felt a bit natural. So it really made me want to keep going. Um, and actually, yeah. So in high school, the goal was just to get involved in any musical situation I could. So it was the jazz band, the marching band. If the choir needed a drummer for one song, I would get in there. The pit band. I was just so hungry and practicing a lot and just listening to a lot of music. And that kind of hunger led me not so long after to you, actually. In, I want to say, 1997, it was like, okay, this is so fun. I love the drums. What else can I do? Or
Right,
where?
right.
And then, I'm sure it was an ad in Modern Drummer. I would assume I would love for you to probably fill in. I'll need you to fill in some details. Hey, here's this camp, and it seems like, whoa, some really cool guys are going to be there. And my parents are willing to drive me up to Vermont, and then they're just going to hang out for a week and do their own thing, and then we all drive back home. And that led me to KoSA.
Yeah, and I remember it was funny because when your name came up, and Yolan, who has an incredible memory for names, I said, "Didn't he come to KoSA?" She said, "Yes, he was there for 2 years. He came for two
Exactly.
years in a row." And I guess you were probably about 18 at that time. I mean, we had just started these camps. And the whole idea of the camps was, because it was my experience too, Mark. I went to, I was the same. I played everything. I mean, you couldn't stop me. It was 24/7. I was just, everything that moved, I was there. If I was
Yeah,
asked
yeah,
to do anything, I just did. And the camps, I would go to every camp that moved, from
yeah,
JB Abersold to the big band camps to marimba camps to the Lyric Percussion Symposium. And then I thought, my big inspiration was when I went to one, and Gary Burton was teaching, Joe Morello was teaching, uh, Carmine Appice was teaching there, Lee Stevens, all of these people, that just changed my whole mental existence. My whole mindset was completely programmed for life, and I could not relate to certain things anymore once I went. When
yeah.
that kind of experience, and that's what the whole KoSA thing was about, to be in one place with all of these people who are totally engaging, inspired, and are the creators of some of this stuff, to be
Oh
your
yeah,
totally surrounded all week. And I think we went a little crazy because it was, you had to choose between, do you go to a class with Jimmy Cobb or do you go to a class with,
yeah.
you know,
Exactly.
Steve Smith, and then we'd have
Exactly.
surprises. We'd have Neil Peart show up. I'd say, Neil, why don't you? And so we always had that level of inner community where you get the inspiration from the very people who are the most inspiring on the planet, and a total percussion. So my idea was, if somebody wants to be just a jazz drummer, I think they should get some rock. So we have Carmine Appice there. You have Arnie Lang doing classical percussion. You have taiko drumming. You have Brazilian, like
Yes,
everything, so that you at least get exposed. Which was,
absolutely. And yeah, I even have memories of the theater that you guys set up, and you were playing DCI videos that I had never seen. Even in the downtime, it was like supercharged. And like what you're saying, um, I guess now it might sound like more more commonplace to a listener now, this kind of experience. But 25 years ago, to be able to have a class with David Garibaldi is one thing, but then to also eat lunch next to him in the cafeteria, and that, and then El Negro is we're hanging out in the evening, and it's not this formal class setting. And now of course the classes are great, but they had a class energy. But to have access to the guys and ladies after outside of class, it's almost like that's when the real stuff can start to happen too. And I remember was there like a little lake on the
Yes,
campus or something?
yes,
I remember just kind of walking down and hearing a frame drum really far off in the distance, and I end up by the lake, and it's Glenn Velez, who's just the maestro of all maestros, just on his own. And I just kind of innocently, it's like, may I listen? I'm sure he's just practicing, and I just sitting here in nature, and he's there and he's throat singing. I'm like, this is, it's those kind of things. So, yeah, thank you for creating that environment. It was really, I still have my notes from there. I have my
really.
notebooks, and yeah, I
Wow.
should try to dig those up sometime. But yeah, I really, it was really powerful. And yeah, I did go 2 years. So the second year, I guess I was going to be a senior in high school the summer before that year. And I went to two camps that summer. The first one being the jazz camp at William Patterson University in New Jersey. And John Riley was there because he was on faculty at William Patterson. So I met him there. And then I was like, hey, by the way, I'm going to be at KoSA next week. He's like, and I knew he was. So I kind of followed him up to KoSA, and then we developed a nice relationship there. Again, I have a memory of, I asked him something in a class, but maybe we didn't have something to listen to. Or I asked him something at a lunch. He's like, oh, come to my car. I have this tape, and I'll play you, this Elvin bootleg that I have. And then before I know it, sitting parked in John Riley's car, checking out some bootleg it's like, this is exceptional, And
Yeah.
then from after connecting with John there that summer, I started studying with him privately. So that was the next kind of big gear shift. I kind of think of it as like Joe really helped me build a strong foundation. We just, really technique driven and all the different styles. And then from there, as jazz started to appear as more of like a focus, I jumped on with John, and that's where it became a lot more about improvisation and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and John is a phenomenal teacher and player, of course. And he was with us for many years, and we had a funny story when John came to Montreal. I said, no, if you're in town, call. And he called me, and I was teaching. I said, well, come to the house. I'm going to finish at such and such a time. And I was teaching, and I forgot to tell Yolan that I had invited him for dinner.
Sure.
So
that's great.
John and his wife, they show up at the door, and Yolan, hi, John. And then he realized, oh, he didn't tell you. And then I'm realizing that I hadn't told her. I said, oh my God. So I called, I said, I just finished teaching. I'll be there in 5 minutes. He said, oh, that's okay. We figured it out.
That's great.
That was funny.
That's great.
But John is an amazing teacher and researcher. What a brilliant mind. And yeah, and that's the nice thing about, putting together this whole KoSA thing. It was like it had to happen. I said, we have to have the world's best people in one place, so you live with them and go beyond the classroom, of course. Rhythm section labs, performances. Like swimming in the ocean. Like this is the deal. And so you build up friendships, not only between the people who are participating, but the faculty also. And then it's a great opportunity for the faculty to see each other. When do you have the chance to do that? And I would always encourage guys, I said, why don't you do something a little different? I remember when we were filming our educational video, and Clayton Cameron was there, and Giovanni Hidalgo, and at the finale concert, I said, hey, Clayton, why don't you do something with Giovanni, just on 2 snare drums and brushes, and just an idea. I said, oh, that's a great idea. So that's what they did, and it's amazing. I mean,
I'm
you know
sure.
those kinds of, you
I'm
can
sure.
only do it in these contexts, right? But it
Yeah.
opens up your imagination. And also
Yeah. So cool.
the networking with people and faculty, and everybody becomes kind of your friend in your next step, which is the whole. I mean, that's what it takes, right?
Absolutely. And this is pre social media. This is pre YouTube. So those connections were made by actually connecting. You know,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so you needed to be in the same room with somebody, and you needed to, so it's really, really great.
Yeah. When did you start from the studying and that development? When did you start developing your style and this whole beat music concept, acoustic or electronic that you swing from one side to another and different ideas with that exploring? When did that kind of when was that
Yeah.
threshold?
Yeah, that's a great question. When you were giving your intro and you mentioned the who, the what, and the why, sometimes the why, I really, when I reflect on it, I don't have great answers for the why. And not to be overly abstract, but I feel like I could find a good answer to why in retrospect. But oftentimes in the moment, there isn't a really clear, this is why I'm going to do this. And it's a lot more just hopefully intuition and just, almost sometimes if I really know why, it's almost like a, whoa, are you sure? You seem really confident about that. So maybe
Right.
it,
Yeah.
um, so, so yeah, I guess now I've been presenting my own music for 15 years or so. So now I could say, looking back, I could figure out the whys. But just as a general disclaimer, um, in the moment, it wasn't, I didn't have terribly grandiose goals or anything. It was really just like a little more short sighted. Hey, I want to present my own music. Okay, so what do I have to do? I have to write some songs, uh, and then I have to grab some guys to play it, and then I gotta convince some club to let us play it, and then I gotta try to get my friends there. And so that like DIY, this is more in college and really compositionally being quite amateur and just breaking a lot of the rules and all these things. It started in that really innocent in an innocent way, and over time, um through doing it, I started to learn what felt right or what didn't. And a lot of it um, was reactions to all the other music I was making, pretty much. So I love to be a sideman. And I think in some capacity, I will always be a sideman forever because the joy you get from playing other people's music, all the stuff you can learn, and all those things. But in the last several years, 5 or 6 years, I've really been putting most of my energy into my own music. So the majority of what I'm doing is my own music. However, before that, it was really mostly playing other people's music, which was very fulfilling. But it goes without saying that you don't choose what that music is. I mean, or the details of the music. So a lot of my own statements when I was in more of sideman mode was again a reaction to the music I was playing as a sideman. So I thought one of my first projects was more electronic called Hearnt. And that was because I was playing with a great bass player named Avishai Cohen. And we were in this really acoustic piano trio, odd meter world. Cool. That's super fulfilling. I want to go play some silly electron, not silly, but just a little more, you know, 4/4 electronic avant-garde, like to fill in the gaps of my other experiences. And I think over time that has rung true. So got a couple other calls in a more acoustic world. I'm going to dig in even more into the electronic world because both fulfill me in equal ways. And then started to present more of myself as in that light. And then maybe I would get a call to be a sideman in that light. Oh, wow. Okay. Someone maybe noticed this way of playing. now they're asking me to play that way. And then I'll sit around and be like, damn, I miss like the quiet acoustic stuff. It's, well, okay, maybe I'll make a project like that to again, to allow, because when I was younger, in a very, very naive way, I used to think, oh man, why doesn't anybody call me to do this? Or why doesn't anybody call me to do this? Like, don't they know I love to play drum and bass? It's like, how would I know? You've never presented yourself in that way. So it's this kind of constant DIY, like, just if you are craving a thing, make it, and create the situation and just try to get it into the world. And then, so, but yeah, the specific artistic choices have a lot to do with contrast and keeping myself excited, like fresh. And so the last chunk of my leader stuff was with beat music, the more electronic thing. And now we're here in New York for the week with the jazz quartet, the acoustic thing, and we'll record next week. We get to play at the Village Vanguard, and that's the exciting thing. I could never play with beat music at the Village Vanguard. That would be not healthy. But to have, but also I could never play at. I don't even have an idea at the moment, but like maybe a place where beat music works, the quartet, of course, would not.
Sure.
So it's really nice to be able to have access to different rooms and different energies. And yeah, we'll record next week, and then whenever the record comes out in the fall or something, we'll do some touring around that, and that'll be the next phase. Yeah. So it's I just, as of course you do and a lot of us do, have so many different things that I want to do and that excite me. I found I'm happiest when I'm doing as many of them as I can, but not in one place. Another very, very naive young thing was like, oh, I love drum and bass. I love jazz. I love salsa. I love reggae, and I love ambient music. I'm going to write music that has all of that. And then it's like, whoa, that's not going to work. So I used to try to cram it all in. And now I've realized, oh, wow, let me honor each and really give it its own space and allow different projects, let the project live in this one place.
But it's interesting. I mean, that's a really good point you make, because as we enlarge in our horizons and our capacities also and our tastes, for example, I mean, Chick Corea would play classical music, and then he would compose all of these other compositions. So he was everything, but not at the same time. He would turn around here, and here he is in this context, and here he is in this other context, right? And it makes sense. So those people who gravitate towards those are not necessarily the same people or the same listeners, because the listener also evolves. Sometimes they evolve with you, right? Or you have to take them there.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, as you make a decision, you say, well, I'm going to do this because of certain people, or I get invited to. Here, an example that comes to mind as I'm saying this is Don McCausland, who you've worked with a lot. And it's funny because I taught at a music camp with him, and we performed together. And I thought,
great.
Yeah, centuries ago. I mean, it was great. He was always brilliant. And then when I learned that you were playing with him, I said, that's fantastic. And then you and him were involved with that record, the Dark Wreck. I call that the darkest record I've ever heard.
Yeah. I know.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about that, because I'll give you my first impression. I said, wow, this is cool. David Bowie doing this album, and then, the whole story behind it, which was, sad to see that happen, but that he actually brought this thing, made this thing be born, and have a jazz group be involved. I thought that was really interesting and enlightening of him. So I was so curious that, I went out and bought the record. I listened to the record, and it was so dark. I couldn't listen through it all the way through the first time. I just said, okay, this I'll have to take it in smaller doses, I think, to let it
Yeah.
process, because it was really dark. And of course, one understands the context, but I mean, that's him deciding where he's going to take that to and where he's going to land. But the interesting thing is, in your own journeys, landing there, that he hears the band and he engages you guys for the record.
Yeah, it's still kind of crazy to think it happened, just for many factors. And yeah, it was such a trip, and just I can't say enough about the experience and him. He was so kind and generous and funny and just prolific, and was with us the whole time. Everything you hear is a take. There would be little fixes and overdubs and stuff, but for Tim and I, the bass player Tim LaFave, the goal was, okay, we'll get the bass and the drums, and then once we know what it is, we'll start to add. Donnie can layer some woodwinds, and he was in the same room, no booths or anything. He's in the room with us singing, so it really feels like a band album,
Right.
and just so grateful to have been a part. And yeah, it's you mentioned getting jazz guys. Tony Visconti was the producer, a longtime collaborator of David's, and I heard him or saw him say in an interview, like, we were thinking, we know we wanted to go in this other direction. Instead of hiring rock guys to play jazz, we just hired jazz guys to play rock, which I think,
that's interesting.
it's a really nice, concise way.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, right. And yeah, it was really flattering because we were hired as a band, so he knew. And now looking back on his career, he did this in different periods. He would seek out particular collaborators, and instead of bringing them to his world, it's almost like he enters their world.
Yeah.
I say that very, very humbly. But it actually made for an extremely comfortable and relaxed environment too, because if at any moment, like, there would be split seconds where, like, whoa, this is going to be that's David Bowie, we're making his record, that would vanish because Tim's in the corner making some dumb joke, or Jason's. It's my guys, it's us. Like, he came into our world.
Right.
He was the new guy of us
Right.
in our band,
Yeah.
So, and don't get me wrong, it was 1,000% his world and his operation. But he did make it a really collaborative environment, welcomed everybody's ideas. So really wild. And like you said, I think if without putting yourself out there or letting people know the sounds you wish to create, it's again, just thinking back on that younger self, I really used to sit around and be like, when is someone going to ask me to play this way? I want to do it so bad. When's someone going to give me the chance to do it? It's like, you don't have to wait for someone to, you're going to be waiting around a while, because no one even knows that might exist,
Exactly.
inside you. So more and more, and now I guess, I have a love-hate relationship with social media, but I guess, you could say nowadays you can put the things out that you wish to express in every moment.
Yeah.
And at the very least, to just let other people know that that's the kind of music you wish to be a part of. But in those days, it meant it was a much more thorough process of, writing some music and putting a band together and maybe making a record, and, hey, this is me. And that's a very vulnerable thing, especially if it's something a little bit outside of maybe the way people perceive you. So, but in this case, now another thing that from this experience that I have to really remind myself often is, let's just face it, I don't think I'm being pessimistic here when I say that it's probably it's the biggest record I'll play on. And I was 30, when did we make it? I was 34 when we recorded it. I hope I live a really long time. I'm at peace with that being the biggest, I mean, just everything that's surrounded in it. It's just, it's really hard to fathom another situation like that. However, there's a temptation, especially in our small little jazz world, to be like, whoa, why are we getting all these calls from Rolling Stone and the New York Times and all this for interviews? And it's like, I feel like that was a really significant fork in the road. Oh, what if I go chase this? And, oh, there's all this attention. How can I maximize the attention? Should I write some music that kind of sounds like Black Star? And then my next record might grab some of those people. And it just feels like, whoa, time out. Because I'd be lying if there wasn't like reflex like that, like, whoa, and I have quickly that I knew that that's not the right choice. And to me, it was more about, because there's a temptation to focus on the reaction to the thing you made and base your next actions on that reaction. But that can be really misleading, So I feel like it was more about, exactly to your point, what led to that situation even happening. And that's what I should be informed by. And that's what I want to keep moving forward. So, and what did we do? Why did that record come about? Why did he call us? We were just minding our own business, writing music that if anybody heard it, cool. If not, cool. We're going to make this music. We're going to make this record. I'm going to play this way. This feels right. And then it just so happens David Bowie hears us and invites us to play. So that has informed me moving forward, as opposed to all the beautiful words people have said about the record and the attention I'm so grateful for. But it's more about what we were doing beforehand, or that mode. I try to inhabit that.
Sure, and also what that kind of thing does is it propels you into thinking. I mean, you could go the direction that you're mentioning, and I can't help but think when those kinds of things happen, well, the common denominator is you in this whole picture. So you say, is that me going here, or is that me just keep going and taking this as one of those great opportunities where I had a chance to be part of something that was great? Now, next, it was like, here's a good one that just came to mind. Imagine the Beatles, okay, they're doing their Let It Be, and somebody else comes into the band, right? Billy Preston comes in.
Yep.
So Billy Preston was brought in because he was such a great musician. They heard that element that was missing in this particular project. He came in, and then he just kept on. And then Billy Preston went on with his own things. He was not thinking, "Oh, I'm playing with the Beatles now. I'm going to do a Beatles record next," or that kind of thing. So I think the lesson learned in those kinds of things is, as you put it very well, there is that temptation. Now I'm here. Well, here's where you are because of what you've done and the choices you've made, and now take advantage of this and keep going. That gives you more license to continue doing what you're doing. Obviously, it gives you validity to what you're doing. So you have now more responsibility to yourself. And then you decide when, your tastes change, or you don't have a certain appetite anymore. That happens.
Totally.
Right?
Totally. And I mean, I feel like he's of all the people to be associated with, he's on the short list as a true artist, in the sense that the chameleon, like, shifting from project to project. So in some ways, I could make an argument that the bouncing around and the pursuing different interests is supported by, the David Bowie Association, or like it just feels like he at the highest level, or even on the most commercial level, was doing that till the end. So that he in himself is serving as a great model, for sure.
Yeah, and also being, a person like I always tell people, we have to be helpful, useful, and make sure that everybody succeeds. So if another interpretation, here's David Bowie giving you folks, like any of us would. I mean, I've played with, many other people myself, and that just helps you and confirms that you're doing something right. So you keep
Hmm.
going, and those people open doors for you. And as we all should be opening doors or turning people on to musics or places or people that will be helpful in our own paths, as long as we stay on it. I mean, as you say, you have to be there. If you weren't there, you wouldn't be there, right?
Yep. Yep.
Right.
There you go. There you go.
And in your projects that you're working on now, I know you're. I mean, now you're living in LA, but you're preparing. You're jumping from one project to the next. I remember when you came to Cuba with us to perform at the KoSA workshop that we did there with the Fiesta del Tambor, and each year we invite one or two different people who I think should be part of that bridge. This idea of introducing people to others, to inspire and to also make them feel like the stars are also among us. I mean, there's no such thing.
Mm.
It's like what you do and how you inspire people, and also it kind of builds up your own matter. You know,
Interesting.
I think when you came down, I mean, you came down twice. You came down by yourself once, and the second time you came with the band and performed
Exactly.
in Havana. And that was
So, oh yeah, sorry. If
no,
I
no.
just, I
I was
feel
gonna
the need.
I was gonna say before
Okay, go ahead.
before you
Go ahead.
answer that, because it was interesting to see. For me, it's interesting to see somebody's reaction who has never been in that kind of context. First of all, to discover, and also to know that those people know who you are and they know what you do. So it was interesting. Jojo Mayer had the same kind of experience. He at first he didn't get it, but then he says, "Okay, let's do it." And when he was there, people would stop on the street and say, "Jojo," and he'd go, "How's that?" I said, "Music is the
Yeah.
universal language, and everybody's watching and everybody's listening. And if you're doing something of interest, they know. Everybody knows." Isn't that
Not
interesting?
not to not to turn this too much into a KoSA commercial, but I feel
No,
the
no,
need
no,
to do a
not.
public service announcement, if you'll let me.
That's not the whole point here. Is like we
No, no,
wanted.
no. I'm saying I'm sorry if this becomes too much of a KoSA commercial, because that experience in particular, of course, as a teenager, the the KoSA experience, the early KoSA experience in Vermont really changed me. But getting to go down to Cuba, I feel like there's me before Cuba and now me after Cuba, in my big picture timeline. And so thank you for that invitation. And yeah, to speak to, it was good to get down there by myself and just get knocked over the head with inspiration and new information, and just like feel really small in the best way. Like you're saying, you're just, wow. Like, um, it was as connected to music and drumming that I've ever felt, um, to the source, I should say, and I'll get back to that later in a second. But the second time when we came down with beat music, it's pretty experimental. It's fairly avant-garde, a lot of electronics, a lot of improvising. And normally I feel great. Like we just play and we do our thing and it's great. And now it's like, oh, we're going to be on this stage with these guys. And I was feeling pretty self-conscious, but it was so nice to hear from you, or to hear from the guys that I got to meet, more of my contemporaries, of like, oh, if you lived in New York, we'd be buddies. Or if I lived here, we'd be buddies. The Rodney and Oliver and these guys, So they're like, no, man, the whole point is you do exactly that thing you do. Don't try to like change it in any way for us or feel this. And I was like, oh, right. Okay. That makes perfect sense. So it might be a little outside of the box, in Havana, but that's kind of the whole point, you
Exactly.
know,
Yeah.
and it helped us lean in and just, um, yeah, it was a wild experience, but the music, wow, it's really crazy. I will say, I felt, you know, I'm not uh, ethnomusicologist at all, but I think it's widespread knowledge that the drums come from Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago, you know, and that's kind of the source, and you can pretty easily now trace it and how it landed in Brazil and how these rhythms appeared, how it
Right.
landed in India and how the, you know, all these things. Okay, I've been geographically, I've been to South Africa, I've been to Morocco, I've been to Algeria, I've been to Tunisia, I've been to Egypt, I've been kind of across the top, and I've been incredible music in all those places, really, really. Um, but I will say, being in Havana and hearing some of these rhythms and some of this music, whether it's um, you know, Osain Del Monte or these guys, and like the real rumba stuff, right? That in those moments, and this is just from my perspective, I say this very innocently, I felt like the most connected to the source. I felt like that's the closest I got to like Africa in a drum sense, because I haven't been to Mali or Ghana or these places, which I really hope to get to. But to me, it felt like the most direct line without being there. And it was, of course, there's a temptation to, whoa, what was that? Oh, what is this thing? Can I find the clave? Can I, you know, my Western brain just rattling. And when, especially the second time, the first time it was just stimuli overload. You know, I was in a
Yeah,
fog.
of course.
Getting to go the second time, I could relax into my body a little bit and just, and maybe a little rum helped, you know, a little bit of rum allowed me to do that. But to really like just get out of my head a bit and relax into my body. And it was like, it really felt it starts to get so cliche or corny to, you know, to talk, to try to talk about those emotions, but it really felt like this is it. This is they're they're on this is
Yeah.
some other stuff. So again, I'd love to hear your perspective on that, but thank you for allowing me to
No, no,
experience
and
that.
it's important. I mean, because you've brought music and drumming to a certain level in a certain direction, and it's interesting to see how someone like yourself, you know, others would do it differently, but in the same spirit, you know, what how it affects you and how. And don't forget also when those people listen to you or Jojo Mera or anybody, they also change. You know, they
Mm,
also say, "Ah, wait a second, I didn't think of that," and it just comes into their world that they mix in. So it's a constant evolution anyway on both sides, and it's interesting to see what
mm,
happens when one of I'll say the word us meaning from this side of that border,
yep.
how we behave musically and how we treat this thing once we're exposed to it. You can't be exposed to it unless your feet are there, for sure,
Yes.
as you know.
Yes.
And then how it affects you moving forward, and it's interesting to watch from the sidelines to see, okay, now what happens, or what musically, where does that go, or how does that fit into the conversation, and you see it. The one thing that I found early on was, especially with a guy like Changuito or even Piloto. I mean, these guys are so connected to this other thing. I could never put my finger on it. And especially a guy like Changuito, because he comes from that tradition. He's not a schooled musician, and he has a direct line to Africa. He's never been to Africa, but he has,
Mm-hmm.
you know, he has. There is something there, Mark, and I for years I'm trying to figure it out, and I can't yet. You know,
Wow.
this thing where he's playing, and I've heard him. I've been going to Cuba for 20 years, and I go 7, 8 times a year. We do these workshops, and we're starting again this year. And I watch him, and he's always coming up with something I had never heard, and I find myself like, we are where we are musically after all of these years, and all of a sudden we become confused. We
Oh
say,
yeah, love it, love it.
I say, boy, am I confused, and Changuito's funny because he'll realize that, and then he'll look at you, he'll look at me or he'll look at somebody else who he kind of threw that at them, and you're saying like, where did that come from? And he's always doing this. And I remember when I was finishing my book, because I did that, the whole Cuban percussion
Yeah.
book over 3 years, and I was always consulting with him, am I doing the right thing? So in the final copy, I sat with Rodney, I sat with Amadito Valdez of Buena Vista Social Club, I sat with Changuito
Hmm.
for hours. I said, please go through the book, absolutely everything, and just make sure that I'm not understating, overstating, or I don't want to take possession of this. I just want to present it so that it's what has been done here
All in one place.
in one
Yep.
place
Yep.
in a method with a methodology that makes sense, that we could understand, and without making statements that were incorrect, which I see a lot after all these years. So we did that, and then I remember his statement to me once finished. He says, "Aldo, your book is beautiful, but this is just the beginning. There is so much more, and when you have time, you have to sit, and I'm going to show you." And I'm saying I need to be around another 150 years for that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But it's interesting because the things they come out with are not all those things we hear and see. It's just
Yeah.
it's huge. And once I said that to Horacio once, because he's living in Havana now, and I said, every time I come down, I hear things I have never heard before. And he says, listen, I'm Cuban, and if I walk 5 kilometers this way, I will hear things I have never heard. And
Yeah.
it's just they understand the source and they respect the source. And no matter how much evolution they get involved in, and they do, as you know, a lot
Yeah.
of it, and creation, that tradition is always in that mix of that cement, always. And you hear
Yeah.
it, and then more. I mean, was that what you felt when you came?
Oh man, it's almost, and I think pardon me if I'm exaggerating to make a point, but it wasn't. It was. Yeah. It wasn't even music at a certain point. It's again, I'm sorry to be abstract, but it was just so beyond. Like, hi, we're musicians on a stage playing music for you, the audience. It was like that felt like this silly little structure that and I get, and that can be great, of course, that formality is great, but there was this, it was incredibly selfless, and it was just all about, it's not like, hey, I have a show tonight, all right, good, going to my gig tonight. Like, it feels like sometimes in more music business environment, it's a lot more transactional. Get to the club at this point, you get set up, you play the concert for this amount of minutes, and you leave and you get paid and you go back home, and you're a certain person when you're on stage and you're another person when you're off stage. And it's very, and that's that it can, though, you can still find very deep meaning and expression in that environment. However, this just, the lines were so blurred at all times. It felt like, I really feel like I'm guilty of, I'm a musician when I'm at the drums, or I'm a drummer when I'm at the drums, and when I'm not in some ways, there's a switch that, okay, now it's time to play. And there it was, it's just, the switch is always on, right? And this fluidity, there was always immediate access to expression at all times. It didn't require a stage. It didn't require the right instrument. I remember late one night, we're standing outside the theater, just sharing some drinks and having fun. And it was nice to have some familiar faces there. So it was you, and it was Daphne, and it was Horacio, and it was like, oh, I feel comfortable. It's not just all new faces. And but there's a joke. We're standing in a circle, and of course, someone just starts singing a thing, and clave appears, and this other stuff, and on the bottle, and it's like, wait, I need to record this. Like, it's
Right.
to them, it's not like, hey, let's break into music now. It's like, no, that's such this
Wow.
binary thing that is sometimes I could be guilty of. It was just pure expression at any moment, and you don't need to prepare for that kind of expression. It's at the ready, and I felt that in the concerts too. Even in the structure of the festival, it might be like, okay, this guy has 8 minutes. It's like, all right, and then it jumps to another project. It's like, all right, you're next. You get your 8 minutes. And sometimes those situations can be not fulfilling as a listener. You're like, oh, but everyone they're just in it because they've been in it. They were in it as they're listening. And then when they get to their instrument, it's just time for them to play. They don't need to go somewhere else in their mind. And then when they're done, they stay in it. It's just always available. And that, from my perspective,
Yeah, no,
and I feel like for me, it's a lot more like, now it's time to do this thing. And I have to like almost get myself there. And I've been trying to just keep that in mind and yeah, just try to be in that more available space in general.
that's a really, really interesting comment you made, and it's true. I never really thought of it that way, although I see it all the time. But yeah, now that you analyze it like that, like they're always there, and they live like that. This is the way you live.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not turning. Okay, now I'm the musician. I'm the drummer. I'm gonna play. No, it's like if there's something to say, you say it. If there's something to play, you play it. If there's something to share, you share it, and it goes on. And there is no timeline. This is when I play. This is when I stop. It's
Exactly.
like, and those things happen all the time. And if I mean, the nice thing is, and you have to be understanding of this, that everyone understands. So if you're not a musician, those other people who are listening to you, they might not be professional musicians, but they understand, respect, and they've grown up with it, so they know what you're
Yeah.
doing. They understand your language, which is probably the thing that we miss in places that are not like that. That you have to, those confines are not developed by us, they're developed by them, really. Because if you're dealing with accountants who have never even seen a musical instrument, and you
Yeah.
talk about opera, you talk about Elvin Jones, you lost him in a split second, and there's no interaction because you can't interact at that point. Whereas there, whether you're playing baseball or whether you're playing music or whether you're walking down the street, there are no limitations because they all understand all of it to a certain degree,
Yep.
or at least appreciate it,
Yep.
or being in the conversation, right? And that makes the difference. I
Yeah.
think what you were saying, and that's a great way to put it, the way you did.
Yeah. It's just so envious of the availability of that energy. I feel like over the years I've gotten more comfortable with finding it within the formality. Oh, we're playing at 8. I know by the time I'm walking on stage, I'll have access to that. But it requires the day, or it requires all these things to fall into place. It's certainly not upon waking, or it's certainly not in a spontaneous moment on the subway when you do it. So it's a really, and it just looks like it, to be a spectator. It's what a joyous way to live, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
It's
Yeah, it's all it's to be shared. And it's funny because you made me remember when we were putting the whole project of KoSA together. I wanted to invite all the top people on the planet, and I became really stubborn about it. And at one point, when I first started going to Cuba, I said, Changuito, he's got to come to Cuba, to the States. So our Vermont
mhm.
project, I said we have to bring him to the States, Changuito. Now, at that time, in order to do that, we had to have special visas, lawyers. It was really a laborious project. But I said, if we're going to build this kind of project, we got to have those people, and that's the mission. So
Yeah.
Yolan and I went to Havana and found out, get the address where he lived. And at the time, he lived on the third floor or something. There's no elevator, or fourth floor or something. Yolan was pregnant. It was the month of August. It was like probably 120 degrees and humid.
Wow.
And we had to walk up the stairs to his place. But before
Wow.
that, we were in a cab, and I'm looking at the address, and the addresses don't make any sense. And I said to the cab driver, this is the address, because I wanted to see him in person, invite him, and explain the whole project. And I'm giving him the address, and then I turn around to Yolan and says, maybe Changuito gave us the wrong address. He turns around, he says, oh, you're looking for Changuito. So he takes us to his house. So he says,
That's
it's right
great.
there. So along with what you were just saying about being available, everybody knows everybody. And, oh yeah, and that's where he lives, and they know. So
Yeah.
it's not like in the sports world, people hide behind this thing. In the music world, others hide behind this, and they come out only, like you only come out at night or on the hockey
Hmm.
arena.
Hmm.
It's like they're there, and they're part of the whole scene all the time, which it blew my mind. Everybody knows who everybody is, and
Yeah.
and it's no big deal, and they can walk down the street, you know, and
Yep.
it's great, and they
But
get it, they understand.
I have one little anecdote based on what you mentioned about JoJo being recognized, and I had or I mean, this was in the context of the festival, so I was performing it, but like some younger guys would come up and say, "Oh, nice to meet you," and very flattering, and I remember a couple comments of, "I have all of your videos." A couple guys said that to me, and I was thinking to myself, I don't have any videos. It's not that I've made videos that I've released, you know. And I was thinking, I have all your videos, okay. And I realized, or found out later, like Horacio, because the internet. So maybe this is, a little. I guess the internet is improving, and they have better access. But when the internet was a little more difficult to get a hold of, Horacio would be. It's just YouTube. It's stuff on YouTube. Horacio would grab stuff, throw it on hard drives, go back to Havana, and just pass it all around. And so those are my videos, or those are you, or those are whoever it's going to be.
Yeah.
And it was such a beautiful, and just that, of course, Horacio is a saint, but he's just that community and that sharing and the openness and the hunger for, like you're saying, the things outside of their world. But that one caught me for a loop. I have all your videos. I was like, I don't, what videos?
Right.
But yeah, just beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
No, and the nice thing is, you're always looked at for what you do, not what kind of car you drive. So that's not even an issue. Those things are brushed aside, and so that puts the pressure, not pressure, I would say, it puts the onus on. Like, did you write something? Did you write a book? Did you make a movie? Did you do a record? Did you do some incredible thing? And that's what you're respected for. I mean, Changuito
Mm.
is like God there. He doesn't have the
Hmm.
fanciest house. He doesn't have
Right, right, right.
none of the above, and it's not even a topic of conversation. But what he has done, he
Yeah.
gets, he's almost sainthood. I mean, and Piloto and all of these people, and it's helping each other. Here, check this out. that whole thing is
Yep.
it's really nice. Especially we live in a different world where that's part of it certainly, but we have to deal with other things that are not as as part of what we normally do, but we have to take care of those things. Yeah,
Totally.
yeah.
Totally.
And now that after this time of sitting and creating, what are your next projects that you're looking forward to be doing?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, um, right now I'm in New York. We're playing a week at the Village Vanguard, and we'll record that music next week. So hopefully that record will come out in the fall, and we will, get to play shows around that release. I've been playing with an artist named Saint Vincent. Her name is Annie Clark, an amazing singer and guitar player. And that's a very different musical situation for me. It's more in the quote rock world. And we had a really nice tour in the fall, and we got to play Radio City, and we played at the Hollywood Bowl, and rooms like that. We were on Saturday Night Live, stuff like that. So it's, for me, it's super exciting to have these new experiences. And they're in pretty great contrast to my typical experiences. So with St. Vincent, there's a lot of touring this year. We'll go to Europe in the summer, and there's other blocks of time held. A couple of the dates are opening for the Foo Fighters in London at some huge stadium. So it's like, oh, that'll be a new experience.
Yeah.
There's even in the calendar is opening for the Red Hot Chili Peppers at Fenway Park. It's like, works for me. All right, let's do it. So it's really, and musically very gratifying. Incredible band. She's amazing. So I feel really lucky to be in that situation. So it's juggling those commitments, sneaking in some of my own stuff, and just trying to keep it moving.
I have a question I wanted to ask you, because when you were at the KoSA camp, the workshop that we did in Montreal, you were working very deeply into playing the pulse and moving the rhythms around. And like how did you come to that approach of being, like, sometimes people play all kinds of things, but you brought it down to a very simple, well, deceptively simple, I should say, concept. And approach. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I found that two things in a group situation like that, where there might be different levels. It's really reliable material to engage people on different levels, because it doesn't matter how great somebody could play. When you really take a look at those fundamental things, it could be quite humbling, me absolutely included. So it's I just found that I guess the easiest answer, it all comes back to just developing strong time. And I used to think about time as the quarter notes. Oh, if I could put the quarter notes where they belong, I'm playing with good time. But of course, it's almost the opposite. It's the only way to know where to put the quarter notes is to really have a deep relationship with the space between them. So then subdivisions are just simply different ways to organize that space. And I feel like the deeper relationship you have with the different ways to organize it, the more confidence you'll have in knowing where that next beat needs to land. So it's kind of mathy on the surface and kind of analytical on the surface, but I'm always trying to kind of crack that surface and get into the deeper kind of big picture feeling of it.
All right. And that makes me think of when I first started learning African rhythms and African drumming. I kind of got the same idea of with that distance between the pulses. I mean, they're more concerned about the pulse, of course, but they don't mathematically divide it. It's just any given interpretation can be stretched in between, but it's not quantized. Sometimes we quantize, which is, I think, and you would probably agree, you have to do that for certain things, but also
Mhm.
understanding the elasticity of non-quantized between
Absolutely.
those the pulses, and it
Absolutely.
could be how many notes can you put in there that make sense, that make musical sense, and have
Hmm.
control over it, or make sense of it. Because I remember we were working with a master drummer for 3 months that we brought from Senegal, not Senegal, Ivory Coast. And the beginning, we would learn the rhythms. I'd write them down. I'd record them. I'd transcribe everything. The next day, I was with repercussion with the group. We decided that's what we were going to do this whole summer. And the next day we would play, and he says, "You guys are playing like robots." He said, "But that's
Mm.
exactly what you played." I'm showing him, and of course, he couldn't read. And then I quickly realized that's such a Western concept of always dividing and being perfect and being correct.
Yep.
And it wasn't like that, because he would change it. Because I would listen to it again. I said, "That's not what you played."
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
then you say to yourself, "I am sure this is what I heard." And then you play it again, and it's different, because
Yep.
you hear those commas, right? You hear the different it was like when I was studying timpani, the teacher I had, he said, all of a sudden he said, "You have to understand that between notes there are 9 commas, so you decide where you are in that, and then that opens up your idea of tuning." And
Wow.
and then the African thing really did it for me to understand. I mean, I'm not a master of this, but I understand what's
Mhm.
what's going on. And if you hear somebody play who's been living in Ivory Coast or Guinea, and they play a certain way, and you hear it, it's not the same thing that you play it, because we tend to try and make it perfect and rhythmically
Yep.
there, without understanding, like jazz. I mean, it moves, and that's the beauty of studying jazz, is it opens up your mind to that possibility. Listen to Elvin, you know,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
your approach is a good one that way, that you take it from there, and studying a drum set, or snare drum, or whatever it is, or rhythm, period, with that idea in
Hmm.
mind, right?
Hmm. Totally. And the humility of course, trying to always remember all of these options. Admittedly, when I'm practicing that in particular, the goal is precision, but that goal of precision doesn't automatically follow me into a musical situation. I think that's a really important umbrella to keep in the practicing. In the pursuit of the practicing, yes, the goal is precision, to just know where these notes belong, but that doesn't mean that's where the music is gonna is where the music wishes them to be. But if you are in a situation where they need to be there, you have access to that. But you can also just refer to them. You know where the eighth note should be, but in this feeling, it's nudged one way or another. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Now that's interesting.
yeah, cool.
Yeah, and the more you play it, of course, the more you develop it, the more you realize there's so much more, right?
Oh yeah, oh
I
yeah.
mean, it's unbelievable, and thank God for music. Thank God for drumming. You know,
Amen.
yes,
Amen.
sir.
Yeah.
Anyway, I really thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll cross paths live and in person. And I
Please,
wish you all the
please,
best.
please.
And, I always say, we're all in a part of this great experiment, and we're definitely fortunate to be part of it and to be crazy enough to do this. But also, what a gift, right? Incredible.
100%.
And the French and
100%.
the friendships, because you have a medium that kind of solidifies a friendship, and you can talk about it forever. It's beautiful, the creation of things. Yes,
Absolutely.
it's like a good
Absolutely.
espresso.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. That's what's on my mind now. I think that's my next stop. Yeah.
Well, Mark, thank you
um,
so much.
oh, my pleasure. Great to virtually connect. It's been too long, and yeah, thanks for everything along the way. Yeah, appreciate it.
And to be continued.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Mike.